Picture this scenario. Out in the open ocean, far from any national coastline, a massive oil tanker sailing under the Russian flag is suddenly intercepted and placed under the control of the United States. This is not a scene from a political thriller or a Hollywood script. This is an actual event, and it carries the potential to significantly alter the atmosphere of relations between Washington and Moscow. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today's video focuses on a major and extremely sensitive development in global politics. The United States has taken custody of a Russian-flagged oil tanker. Russia is condemning the move as illegal. The United States insists it was a lawful enforcement action. So what exactly happened, and why does it carry such serious implications? Let's break everything down step by step. What happened? Based on official statements, a tanker operating under the Russian flag was intercepted while at sea and subsequently brought under U.S. custody. American authorities claim that the vessel was engaged in activities that breached international sanctions related to oil transportation. Put simply, the U.S. position is clear. The cargo shipment did not comply with existing sanctions frameworks. The seizure was carried out under established legal and regulatory authorities. Crucially, there were no reports of injuries or mistreatment of the crew, and officials emphasized that this was a law enforcement operation, not a military confrontation. Russia's response. Moscow reacted swiftly and forcefully. Russian officials stated that the tanker was legally operating under the Russian flag and argued that stopping it amounted to a violation of international maritime law. Several Russian lawmakers labeled the action unjustified, provocative, and driven by political motives. For Russia, this issue goes far beyond a single ship. It touches on questions of sovereignty, national pride, and fundamental legal principles. So why is the seizure of one tanker dominating global headlines? Because this is not just about oil. It is about economic sanctions, control over global trade routes, and the balance of power between major states. If the United States continues to directly enforce sanctions against vessels linked to Russia, and Russia continues to reject those actions as illegitimate, the result could be escalating diplomatic tension, rising uncertainty in international shipping, and possible ripple effects across global energy markets. This is not an isolated episode. It is part of a much broader geopolitical struggle. From Washington's perspective, this move was about enforcing sanctions and ensuring regulatory compliance. From Moscow's point of view, it represents double standards and an overextension of authority. The truth is that international law is complex. Sanctions are often shaped by politics, and when major powers collide, even technical actions take on symbolic meaning. That is why many analysts describe this not merely as a legal step, but as a strategic signal. What could happen next? In the days or weeks ahead, we may see legal challenges, formal diplomatic protests, or stricter controls on shipping and energy trade. Any form of escalation, whether economic or political, carries the potential to affect oil prices, global supply chains, and overall international stability. That is why governments, markets, and analysts around the world are monitoring this situation closely. This is not simply the story of a single vessel. It is a story about power, law, and the stress tests facing the global system. One side claims it is enforcing established rules. The other argues those rules are being applied unfairly. The real question is no longer just why the tanker was seized. The real question is whether we are witnessing another turning point in U.S.-Russia relations. If you found this breakdown helpful, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Do you view this as a legitimate law enforcement action or as a political message? We've discussed how the United States seized a Russian-flagged oil tanker, but the real story does not stop there. What follows such an action is often more consequential than the action itself. To recap briefly, the U.S. says the tanker was operating in violation of international sanctions. Russia rejected that claim, calling the seizure unlawful and politically motivated. That brings us to the next question. What are the legal, economic, and strategic consequences of this move? Legal front. What could Russia do? First, let's examine the legal dimension. Russia has several potential avenues. It can challenge the seizure through international legal mechanisms. It can raise the issue in diplomatic forums and maritime organizations. Or it can attempt to argue that the action violated established maritime norms. Even if no immediate ruling emerges, the case itself becomes a global debate, over precedent? Who has the authority to enforce sanctions on the high seas, and where do those limits lie? Economic impact, why markets care. Next is the economic aspect. Oil is more than just a commodity. It is a strategic resource that influences energy prices, inflation, and global trade flows. When a tanker is seized under sanctions enforcement, it sends a signal to shipping companies, insurers, and energy traders. Certain routes may now be viewed as higher risk. Certain cargoes may face closer scrutiny. Even without further escalation, uncertainty alone can shape market behavior. Geopolitical signal, more than a ship. This incident is also widely interpreted as a strategic message from the United States. It demonstrates a willingness to actively enforce restrictions beyond paperwork and official statements. For Russia, it is perceived as part of a broader pressure strategy. In international politics, actions like this are rarely standalone events. They become reference points for future negotiations, decisions, and countermeasures. Could Russia respond? Is a response likely? Possibly, but not necessarily in a dramatic or immediate way. Responses could include diplomatic protests, legal challenges, increased inspections of Western-linked shipping in certain regions, or intensified messaging in international forums. Most analysts believe both sides will seek to avoid direct confrontation while firmly defending their positions. Expert perspective. Analysts emphasize that this case highlights a broader trend. Sanctions are no longer purely economic instruments. They are becoming operational tools enforced in real time. At the same time, critics warn that selective enforcement risks creating a system where rules depend on power rather than consistency. That debate, law versus influence, is now central to this story. What to watch next? Looking ahead, here are the key indicators to monitor. Any formal legal filings or international complaints, changes in shipping insurance policies, reactions in energy markets, and statements from major global powers and trade organizations. Each of these signals will reveal whether this incident remains largely symbolic or evolves into a broader shift in global enforcement practices. This was never just about one tanker. It is about how rules are applied in a world where power, politics, and economics are deeply intertwined. One side insists it is enforcing the law. The other argues the law is being used as pressure. Somewhere between those positions lies the core issue. Who gets to define the rules of global trade today? If this analysis helped clarify the bigger picture, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video. And let me know in the comments, do you think this kind of enforcement will become more common, or will it push countries to build alternative systems outside existing frameworks? We've covered what happened. We've analyzed the immediate legal and economic effects. Now we go deeper because this incident may not only affect oil or shipping, it may be revealing something far more significant about how power is exercised in today's world. Let's put this into broader context. The United States says the tanker was seized under sanctions enforcement. Russia says the move violated maritime norms and was politically driven. Beyond the legal arguments, governments, corporations, and analysts are now studying this as a test case. How far can sanctions be enforced in practice? And what happens when a major power openly challenges that enforcement? The bigger question, who controls the rules? At its core, this story is not just about a ship. It is about who defines the rules of global trade and security. For decades, many international systems, banking, shipping, insurance, energy markets, have operated under frameworks heavily influenced by Western institutions. Sanctions rely on these systems to function. By seizing a tanker, the U.S. is signaling that rules are not only written down, they can be enforced directly, even in complex international environments like open seas. Supporters see accountability. Critics see power imbalance and selective enforcement. Could this lead to retaliation? That brings us to the critical question. Will Russia respond in kind? Most experts do not expect immediate dramatic action. Instead, potential responses may be calculated and strategic, pursuing legal challenges through international maritime bodies, increasing scrutiny of Western-linked shipping in specific regions, expanding alternative trade routes that bypass Western-controlled systems, and strengthening partnerships with countries skeptical of the current sanctions framework. These moves may not generate headlines overnight, but over time they could reshape global trade and enforcement. Economic rebalancing beyond oil. This story extends beyond energy alone. Oil is symbolic, but the same logic applies to shipping, logistics, banking, and payment systems. Insurance and reinsurance, port access, and transit routes all come into play. If countries feel that existing systems can be weaponized against them at any moment, they may accelerate efforts to build alternatives, parallel financial systems, independent shipping and insurance networks, and reduce dependence on institutions tied to geopolitical rivals. Quietly, this could contribute to a more fragmented global economy. Strategic interpretation. Many analysts describe this incident as part of a shift from symbolic sanctions to operational enforcement. In the past, sanctions worked mainly through paperwork, banking restrictions, asset freezes, and trade limits. Today, enforcement is becoming physical, logistical, and visible. Supporters argue this strengthens international rules. Critics warn it risks turning legal mechanisms into tools of geopolitical pressure, especially when enforcement is uneven. This debate is not new, but this case has made it tangible. Long-term scenarios. Let's consider the possible long-term outcomes. Scenario 1. Managed containment. Both sides defend their positions but avoid escalation. The case becomes a legal and diplomatic reference point without major disruption. Scenario 2. Strategic decoupling. More countries seek to operate outside systems where sanctions can be directly enforced, creating parallel trade channels. Scenario 3. Escalation of enforcement. Sanctions enforcement becomes more frequent and more direct, improving compliance but increasing the risk of standoffs and retaliation. Which path unfolds will depend not only on Washington and Moscow, but on how other global players respond. Why other countries are paying attention. This is not solely a bilateral issue. Nations across Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America are watching closely. They are asking whether similar enforcement could one day target them, and whether global systems are neutral or instruments of power. The answers will shape alliances, trade deals, and long-term strategies. So what does this all mean? This incident is not just about a tanker. It is about the future of global governance, how rules are applied, who enforces them, and whether law and power can truly be separated. One side frames this as legal enforcement in a rules-based system. The other sees pressure through selective application. Between those views lies a deeper global question. Are we moving toward a more rules-driven world or a more power-driven one? This moment may be remembered not for the ship, but for what it revealed about international politics in transition. We've explored the politics, the law, and the global power struggle behind the tanker seizure, but in Part 4, we turn to the question that affects millions of people worldwide. Could this actually impact your daily life, your fuel costs, your economy, your future? So far, this may sound like high-level geopolitics, governments, sanctions, and international law. But global energy is not abstract. It affects transportation, food prices, inflation, manufacturing, and household budgets. When an oil tanker becomes part of a political confrontation, the consequences can extend far beyond the vessel itself. How energy markets react to tension. Energy markets are extremely sensitive to uncertainty. When traders see political conflict, sanctions enforcement, or disruptions to shipping routes, they begin pricing in risk. Even if no oil is removed from supply, fear of future disruption can influence contracts, insurance costs, and transport decisions. Shipping becomes more expensive. Insurance premiums rise. Routes are reconsidered. Those costs do not disappear. They move down the chain toward businesses and ultimately consumers. Could oil prices rise? Let's address that directly. A single tanker seizure is unlikely to cause dramatic price spikes on its own. Global oil supply is large and diversified, but markets focus on trends, not isolated events. If enforcement actions increase, if routes are seen as riskier, and if insurers and logistics firms raise costs, oil prices could gradually face upward pressure, not overnight, but through accumulated costs and prolonged uncertainty. What this means for everyday life. Let's bring it closer to home. Even modest increases in energy costs can ripple through fuel and transport, food production and delivery, manufacturing, electricity, and heating. Ultimately, this affects consumer prices. That's why energy is often called the backbone of the global economy. When it becomes entangled with geopolitics, the effects rarely stay contained. Different countries, different impacts. The effects would not be uniform. Energy importing countries could face stronger inflationary pressure. Energy exporters might benefit from higher prices in the short term, but face greater political and logistical risks. Developing economies already under strain could experience significant social consequences from even small cost increases. Although the incident involves major powers, its implications are global. Psychological effects on markets. There is also a powerful psychological dimension. When companies and investors see geopolitical conflict affecting physical trade, ships, cargo, routes, they reassess risk, diversify suppliers, and avoid certain regions. This accelerates a shift toward fragmented supply chains where efficiency is sacrificed for security. Over time, that fragmentation can make the global economy more expensive and less stable. Could this change how energy is traded? Some analysts believe incidents like this encourage long-term adjustments, alternative shipping corridors, new energy partnerships outside traditional systems, and regional energy strategies to reduce dependence on global routes. These changes happen gradually, but over time they can reshape how energy is produced, transported, and priced. What to watch going forward. Key indicators to monitor include changes in global shipping insurance policies, energy price movements tied to geopolitics, new trade or energy agreements between major blocs, and statements from international energy organizations. If we see consistent cost increases linked to enforcement actions, it will signal a shift from symbolism to real economic impact. So what does Part 4 tell us? This case is not only about politics or law, it touches the foundations of modern life, energy, trade, and economic stability. One ship will not change the world, but repeated actions of this kind can gradually reshape markets, supply chains, and everyday expenses. The deeper question now goes beyond US-Russia relations. It is about whether global energy and trade will remain interconnected or become increasingly divided along political lines. We've covered the facts. We examined legal and economic consequences. We explored power dynamics and everyday impacts. Now in Part 5, we arrive at the biggest question of all. Is this simply another political dispute, or are we witnessing early signs of a new global order? For decades after the Cold War, the world largely operated under systems dominated by a few major institutions, rules, and alliances. Trade, finance, shipping, and energy became deeply interconnected. But incidents like the seizure of a Russian-flagged tanker suggest something deeper is changing. Power is more openly contested. Rules are being tested in practice, not just debated. Countries are reassessing how much they trust existing systems. This is why analysts describe the moment not merely as a crisis, but as a transition from globalization toward fragmentation. One of the defining trends of the past decade has been a shift away from pure globalization toward strategic blocs. Instead of one unified system, we see regional alliances, parallel financial structures, alternative trade routes, and energy partnerships shaped by politics as much as economics. The tanker incident fits this pattern, highlighting how access to global systems can become conditional during political tension. Law versus power, a changing balance. At the heart of this story lies a fundamental question. Are international rules truly neutral, or are they shaped by power? Supporters of strict enforcement argue that rules only matter if they are applied in real situations. Without enforcement, law becomes symbolic. Critics respond that selective enforcement turns law into a political tool, eroding trust when power determines application. This tension is not new, but it is now more visible and harder to ignore. The rise of alternative systems. In response, many countries are quietly preparing alternatives, new payment and settlement systems outside traditional networks, independent shipping insurance arrangements, regional trade agreements that bypass established frameworks, and energy deals designed to reduce reliance on politically sensitive routes. This does not signal immediate collapse of the current system, but it does suggest a gradual move toward multiple centers of influence. What this means for business and trade. For global companies, this shift introduces complexity and risk. Businesses must now weigh not only efficiency and demand, but political exposure and regulatory uncertainty. As trade becomes politicized, stability may take precedence over speed, security over scale. Over time, that could translate into higher costs, slower growth, and more regionalized supply chains. Strategic perspective. Many strategists describe today's environment as a move from a rules-based order to a contested order. Rules still exist, but they are frequently challenged. Enforcement becomes a demonstration of power, and every major action is interpreted geopolitically. The tanker case may not define this shift, but it clearly reflects it. Long-term possibilities. Looking ahead, several outcomes are possible. Scenario 1, a rebalanced order, where norms are renegotiated in a more multipolar system. Scenario 2, parallel worlds, where blocs operate separate economic and energy ecosystems. Scenario 3, heightened competition where enforcement, sanctions, and countermeasures become more common. Which path emerges will depend on decisions made far beyond Washington and Moscow. Why this matters to everyone. This is not just a debate for diplomats. The structure of the global order influences prices, jobs, energy access, technology, and long-term economic security. Whether the world stays interconnected or fragments into competing systems will shape opportunities and challenges for decades. So what does Part 5 ultimately tell us? The tanker seizure is more than a geopolitical incident. It is a signal, subtle but powerful, about where the world may be heading. A world where power is openly contested, rules are enforced through action, and global systems are no longer assumed. The real question is no longer only about the US and Russia. It is about the future of international order itself. Are we moving toward a balanced multipolar world or a divided and competitive one? History may one day remember moments like this not for the ship involved, but for what they revealed about a world in transition.